The things that have carried me through is try to find time to write every day. Find a certain time, a certain place when you sit down. If you do it the same time, the same place every day, when you get there, you're in the mindset and you can do it. Even days where you can't write, nothing good is going to come out. Those are sometimes the times the best things happen. Just keep writing.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage. So, every author has a mission, but what happens when that mission becomes a sacred calling to rewrite history itself? Today's guest didn't just stumble into writing, she was chosen by the ghosts of forgotten women to tell their stories. Dr. Lori Joan Swick has spent her career as both a university professor and award-winning author, excavating the buried truths about women who initiated the world's religions, and their latest masterpiece proves that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that have been hiding in plain sight for over a millennium. So, on today's podcast, we're going to discover how one woman's sacrifice and one man's artistic obsession created a love story that transcends time, death, and everything we thought we knew about saints. Lori, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Danielle. Thank you for allowing me to share my work here.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation. Of course, I'm very excited about this one. You have some incredible books out there and all very fascinating. So before we dive into that, though, I always like to ask, get a little bit of background information on you. What drew you to pursue a PhD in religion and philosophy with a focus on women's spirituality? What was that calling like?
It's hard to explain. I think when I started doing my undergraduate work, I started studying English writing. And then as I took a lot of classes, I realized I really liked religion, which is more like from the anthropological perspective. In other words, what in religion makes people do what they do, how religious beliefs affect people, the ritual of religion, the mythology, just what it has to do with the human spirit and the human condition in general. So I ended up doing my undergraduate work in writing and religion. Got a full scholarship to do a master's degree in theology at the University of Notre Dame, which was fascinating. And I wanted to really learn more. I was getting into like feminist theology, if you will, and women's stories in history. And I was beginning to realize I was really interested in that. So I did my PhD in San Francisco in a program that was for philosophy and religion. Again, with the concentration in women's spirituality, and it was just a perfect fit for me. So I ended up rounding up my education that way.
Wow, very, very fascinating there. Thank you so much for giving us a nice overview so we can get some context for where all these books came from. Some amazing stuff. But yeah, let's touch upon the sculptor and the saint to start. Do you happen to have a copy of the book with you today?
Of course.
Well, there it is. I love it. Can you tell us a little bit about that cover? What was the design process like? Did you have a lot of say in it?
Oh, I did. No, this is the Saint Cecilia, and she's from ancient Rome. The sculptor Stefano Maderno was hired by the Pope in 1599 to view her remains. They literally exhumed her dead body,
Wow.
and from that, they say, and this is part of the mystery of the book that really intrigued me to do more research and write it. They say that when they opened the coffin, she was completely incorrupt. She looked like she had just died. And this was like, she would have been dead for like 1400 years at this point.
Oh, wow.
That there was no putrefaction, there was no corruption. But anyway, according to the story, he sculpted her likeness in death from what he viewed when they exhumed her body. And Stefano was only 23 years old when this happened. So, of course, I was really interested in telling this story from his perspective as he's sculpting this amazing statue and saying what he's thinking about her, and then looking back in time at Cecilia and what I think probably really happened in her life based on what we know about history now and that culture at that time.
That is such a fascinating mystery. Did you just stumble upon that story yourself? I mean, I feel like I've never heard about that, but it's very incredible. How did you come across that?
Here's how it happened. Uh, I grew up in the Catholic schools, and when I was 10, we were confirmed and we had to pick a patron saint. Well, Saint Cecilia is a patron saint in music. I like to sing, I like to play the piano, so I chose her as my patron saint. Well, then as I never gave it a lot of thought, but then when I was an adult, many years later, I was sitting in a cathedral with my two sons, and I looked up at there's a stained glass window of Saint Cecilia, and I thought, oh gosh, I really don't know much about her. I want to know about her life. So I started to research her, and that's what really got me interested in Cecilia in the first place. That's basically where I started with it. And then I started doing a lot of research and finding out some really interesting things. Her life is mostly a mystery to us, if you will. But what we do know about her was written like in the fourth or fifth century, which would have been 200 to 300 years after her death, her martyrdom. And so it was kind of this glorified version, I think, of what they think her life was like, that had a lot of romanticism about the man that she married and the beautiful, wonderful life that they had together, but that she wanted to give herself to Jesus Christ. Uh, and, uh, and so this really romantic story, and then really violent story about her death and martyrdom, which is really interesting. And so I got really hooked on this, trying to figure out what was going on with it. But everywhere when I did research on Saint Cecilia, then Stefano Maderno kept coming up about how he sculpted her likeness,
Mhm.
and I just sort of felt like I needed to start with him and see what he knew and had learned about her in the Renaissance history, looking back at what happened to her in ancient Rome, and just sort of juxtapose the two. My purpose for this was to kind of show how throughout history, what we've learned about women is not exactly the same as what their real life might have been like. So as I got into research and I saw what Stefano was learning about Cecilia during his time when he sculpted her, and then I started researching what scholars and academics are saying about what patron women of her stature, what their life really would have been like in Cecilia's time. And then I started sort of piecing together what her life was probably really like based on what we knew about her. And that's just kind of what formed the novel, if you will.
Yeah, very interesting. I always like when authors talk about the research process because it's something that we all must go through. Of course, you don't want to, even if it is fiction, not that this is, but in any situation, you need to check your facts, make sure things make sense. So it's always great to, see different methods of how you did it. And it sounds like yours just like digging up buried treasure, trying to learn a little bit more about it. Is that why you structured your novel so that it jumps between 287 AD and 1593 AD? If there's quite a gap there, was that a result of what you found in your?
Yeah, I mean, that's because, and it is like finding buried treasure. I mean, the research process for me is like, oh, aha, there's a lot of aha moments as you go along. So I like you're saying it's like finding buried treasure because it really is. But the reason for the two timelines is that's when she would have lived. Nobody's exactly sure. There's conjecture that she wasn't even a real woman. But they have her dated between somewhere between the first and the second century, between the first and the third century. I set her more in the second century for a lot of reasons, but also Stefano, we know, lived and sculpted when he did. So, and also the main reason I did that again was to show what probably really happened to this woman when she lived versus what telescoped about her throughout history. And that was important to me because she's kind of the prototype. She's considered the head of the Virgin Martyrs. And the Virgin Martyr cult back at that time in Hellenized Rome really established cultural standards about women, many of which are still very much inoperative today. Okay. So I'm trying to show this is kind of a history of women and probably what her was really like. And then this throughout history is what we came to believe about her. And these was kind of what gender roles were based upon. So there's a lot to learn by looking at what was said about her in the Renaissance, which kind of laid the path for what we believe about her today and what I think really happened to this woman in history. that I
Wow.
think is significant for women today to understand.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing a bit about that. I think it's something that, first off, I never knew about before, but you've definitely brought it out there with your books, and more people can learn about it, which is incredible. So I wonder if we could switch to more about the writing process. We talked a lot about the research of it, but, um, you know, what advice would you give to other writers of, historical fiction, bringing authenticity to their work? Like, how was that? What was that like for you? Taking the facts and kind of bringing
What I write is, but this is historical biographical fiction. So
understood.
since it's based on a real person, and a lot of times, and I think it's probably fair in some worlds to play with this and have fun, and it's done and it's entertaining. But it's important to me because I'm trying to tell the story of real women's lives, to honor their real lives as much as I can when I write about them. Now, when I'm writing about a historical figure like Saint Cecilia, where very little is actually known, there's a lot of bridges to build, between what we know about her and what I think based on my research. And I do a lot. So, my process, and what I would suggest if you're writing this kind of fiction, find as much as you can out about the person, and then go and find what scholars and academics are saying today about that time in history, about people in that culture. Anthropology and archaeology has just expanded to the point where we can tell so much more about cultures than we ever could before. I mean, they can carbon date things almost exactly. Through architecture, they've learned how to read it throughout history. Art, you can find a lot about art. If you find out what people are learning today about this ancient time, and then I use that and I juxtapose that with what general thought is or what the general story that's been passed down in lore. And just like you said, buried treasure happens. Things start to pop out, and it's like, oh, I didn't think this makes sense. This is probably what really happened over here. And then it's just fascinating. It just sort of unfolds before your eyes what this person's life might have really been like, and in a way that you can tell it truthfully. The trick with fiction is keeping that entertaining, so between the truth and entertaining for today's fiction reader is another balancing act that you really have to kind of work with as you go along. I'm an outliner. When I find out what the person's general life was, I outline what the novel's going to be like, and I use that as a guide, and that helps me. But I would just suggest have fun with the research. Be a detective, and allow those aha moments to happen. That's just the fascinating part of the process for me.
I love that. Yeah, thank you so much for walking us through that a bit. I think that's something that a lot of people can kind of, follow your lead on. It's definitely, it's also true that you have a lot of passion behind it, which definitely shines through in the way you're speaking of it, which is great.
Thank you. I
Of
certainly do.
course. But this isn't your only book. You do have a couple other incredible books out there. So I'm wondering if you can shine a little bit of light on them. How do your books Comfort and Myrrh and Dreaming the Sacred Art connect to this your overall mission and themes?
Well, Comfort and Mirth, it's historical fiction. It was written before I started doing more biographical fiction about women in spiritual history, but it is about a woman in history. It was published by TCU Press in 2009, and it's a story of a young woman who moved to Austin, which is my home in Central Texas, at the turn of the century, before the 20th century, with her husband, who was one of the first philosophy professors at the University of Texas. And, they set up a home and they have children.
Mhm.
And he starts womanizing and, straying, and just kind of throughout her womanly wisdom and her motherly nurturing, she sort of out philosophizes him. But that was a fun book to write. Dreaming the Sacred Art is my nonfiction book. I wrote this book. I was doing my dissertation, my doctoral dissertation. I had done a lot of work on coursework, doctoral work on dreaming and the art of dreaming, and I was planning to write a book, Women Dreaming as a Sacred Art. And Skylight Paths Publishing found that online, and they contacted me and asked if I would do a general book on dreaming as a sacred art. And I said, sure, but can I put in a chapter about women in dream history? Because women really were prophets and guides and really important figures in sacred dream. dreaming throughout history. And they said, sure. So anyway, that's how that book happened. It was published by Skylight Paths Publishing in 2014, which has since been assumed by Turner Publishing. But that was a lot of fun to write.
Yeah,
Mhm.
thank you for sharing a little bit of light on that. I think it's cool that you dabble between a couple different types of books, and well, now
Mhm.
you've kind of find your calling with the biographical one. So,
Right. Mhm.
but that being said, what can you tell us about your newest book, the Snake Priestess? I know that's, very exciting, something to, for everyone to get
I
excited.
am having so much fun with that book. I'm editing it. It started when I went to Crete, and I went to the Palace of Knossos, it's called, and this is a little figure. There's these faience figures that were found that were carved like 1400 years BC. And she's known as a snake goddess, but again, I went and did all my research, and I really think she was a priestess. And so the story is about her. The book basically is about what I think, based again on a tremendous amount of research, the ancient priestess goddess relationship was really like. What was it like to be a high priestess, the one who was in communique with the great goddess in the ancient religions that were goddess centered? And what was her life really like? And so that's what my new book is about. It'll probably come out next year. I'm in the final process of editing it, which has been a lot of fun.
That is so exciting, especially when you're getting to the final stages like that. I think any author listening today could totally relate to that. It's like your baby and it's finally coming out into the world. So, very exciting stuff.
It is like giving birth.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So awesome. Where can everybody go then to stay up to date with the release and of course check out your other books? What's the best place for them to find you?
On my website for sure, lauriejohnswick.com. You might check out my video blogs, and if you can get a sneak peek of this book on my home webpage, um, The Snake Priestess, if you check and scroll down, you can get a little. There's a little excerpt there that you can read and get a sneak peek of it.
That's so amazing. Thank you for that, guys. We're going to put the links to that in the description box of this podcast today, so you can go ahead and click on over and explore and get to know a little bit. But that being said, I think it's time for us to transition more about the writing process and some amazing tips here. We've talked about a bunch, but there's always more, especially the fact that, your books do go from very different historical periods, and in doing so, you have to get into the mindset of your characters, of course. So, what's your method for doing that? How exactly do you come up with such rich, layered characters when it's all derived from research? What's that process like for you?
Well, again, when I garner enough research, about what their lives were like and their culture was like, and then I travel, of course, to where they lived. I went to Rome and I walked through the catacombs. I went to where her body was for many years. I went to her basilica. Being there is very moving. It really helps you put yourself in their culture. But when I learn a lot about them, um, what I do is I start thinking about it. I start thinking about my character. But when I wake up in the middle of the night or 2 or 3 o'clock and I can't go back to sleep, which at my age happens a lot, instead of letting my mind wander off into other stuff, I just start thinking myself through like I'm that character and putting myself in their culture. And there's something about doing it in the raw morning when everybody else is asleep that helps it come alive in my mind. And then a lot of times I'll dream about it because I'll set myself up for it. And it kind of helps put me in the mindset when I write. And then again, when you get a good character, which I'm lucky because history's done a lot of this for me, but when you start putting them down on paper and start writing with them, they do come alive. They take on their own persona and they start telling you what they're going to do, as
Mhm.
any good writer has experienced. Um, so the basic thing is to just kind of get the outline of who they are and try to put yourself in their mind and then let them grow through you, is my method, I should say.
I love that. It sounds like they actually become like your friends, right? They're growing with you and telling you what they would do.
You're a
That's
part of me, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, what other advice would you give to aspiring historical fiction writers about bringing authenticity into their work. What other bits of knowledge would you like to share?
Well, the things that have carried me through is try to find time to write every day. Find a certain time, a certain place when you sit down. If you do it the same time, the same place every day, when you get there, you're in the mindset and you can do it. Even days where you can't write, nothing good is going to come out. Those are sometimes the times the best things happen. Just keep writing. I think it was Ernest Hemingway who said he had to write 100
Mhm.
awful pages. He used a more terse term to get one good one, but you just have to go through it and write it. So keep writing. The biggest thing that carries me through when I write is I love my work. I love it enough to go through it over and over and over again, enough to take tender, good, loving care of it. I make writing a sacred process. I light candles. I put on background ambient music that relates to what I'm writing. I let myself get, sometimes I put strings of lights up. I let myself totally get into my magical world so that I can get in that just sacred meditative mindset and just love writing, just love the process of writing, love my work like my babies. Just every page is important, every paragraph's important. Love it, work with it till it's perfect. That's my best advice right there.
That's incredible. Yeah, thank you for that. I think a lot of people can definitely, learn from that and carry on from today. What would be like the first step that you would recommend to somebody to do? Like, for example, a podcast ends right now. If they want to get started on their book, what would the first step for them to be?
Oh, yeah. Read a lot, read a lot in the genre you're interested in writing again, writing in. Um, you know, Learn grammar, just learn it. Grammarly's out there, but it's not always right. Get a good grammar book and just take the time to learn it. Sometimes learning a foreign language is the best way to do that because you figure out then finally what a past participle is, that sort of thing. But learn grammar and punctuation, but then just have fun with it. Just keep writing and find out what your passion is, what you like to write about, and write every day. Journal. Just free form writing is everything.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. I think it's something that, again, everyone can, when we're done today, follow that advice. I love it. And also, everybody, be sure to check out Lori's links, which are going to be in the description box of this podcast today. So much to learn, so much to be excited for. And yeah, we're just going to have to be on the lookout for this Snake Priestess coming out soon. Exciting stuff. Laura, it's been a pleasure to chat with you today. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Danielle. I appreciate it too. This has been great.
Of course, of course. And to all of our listeners out there today, just use Lori as an example for how she's transformed her academic experiences into compelling stories. They really do serve a greater mission. And sometimes the most powerful books aren't just entertainment, they're acts of justice, giving voice to those who, may have been silenced by history. It's an amazing thing you're doing here, Lori. Yeah,
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you. Mhm.
to you listeners, keep writing, keep pushing boundaries, and remember that every story you tell has the power to change how someone else sees the world. Until next time, this is Authors on Mission Podcast. Have a great day, everybody. That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or a leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.